Hello everyone. We're now on the third part of exploring confidence interval. In this video, you will learn to compute the length of the confidence interval when the population standard deviation is unknown. This video will help you apply the formula in determining the margin of error when the population standard deviation is unknown. And it will help you compute for the length of the confidence interval when the population standard deviation is unknown. Unlike the previous videos, we compute for the confidence interval when the population standard deviation is known. Again, as a recall, interval estimate is a range of values of a population parameter. It has a lower limit equal to the mean minus standard margin of error, and the upper limit is equal to mean plus the margin of error. For example, if we have a mean of 55 and an error of 2.5, our lower limit is equal to mean minus error, which is 55 minus 2.5. That results to 52.5. For the upper limit, we have mean plus error, which is 55 plus 2.5, meaning 57.5. So our interval will be from 52.5 up to 57.5. So in this video, the formula that we will use to solve for the margin of error when the population standard deviation is unknown is margin of error is equal to the t-value of an alpha over 2 and a degree of freedom of n minus 1 multiply to the quotient of the sample standard deviation divided by the square root of n, which is the sample size. So, ang ibig sabihin pala, when the population standard deviation is known, what we have is only the sample standard deviation. So, if the given standard deviation is population, you use the part 2 video. If the sample standard deviation is the given, you use this video, the third video. If that is the computation for the margin of error, coming from this short formula, we will consider solving the margin of error E using the t-distribution. Kasi nga, what we have is only the sample standard deviation. And we'll have this long formula. To make this short, we will follow again the steps, just like similar to the previous one. We will first write the given data, then we'll compute for the margin of error, so that we'll determine the upper limit and the lower limit, and finally to determine the length of the confidence interval. So how does this formula of a margin of error when the population standard deviation is known works on a word problem? Example, 10 randomly selected people were asked how long they slept at night. The mean time was 7.1 hours, and the standard deviation was 0.78 hours. Find the 95% confidence interval of the true mean. Assume that the variable is normally distributed. For the given data, since we are talking about 10 randomly selected people, it means that is just our sample. So we are dealing with the sample. So the next sentence gave us its mean and its standard deviation. So this mean and standard deviation are just sample mean and sample standard deviation. So our sample mean is equal to 7.1 hours, and our sample standard deviation is equal to 0.78 hours. And we're going to use 95% confidence level. And we forgot that we have 10 randomly selected people. That means we have a sample size of 10. To compute for the margin of error, to identify the t-value, this t alpha over 2, n minus 1, we're going to use the 95% confidence level and as well as our degrees of freedom n minus 1. So if we have a sample size of 10, you all know that the degree of freedom will be 9, which is from 10 minus 1 equals 9. So we'll have 95% confidence level and a degree of freedom of 9. So looking at the table, we have to follow the 95% confidence level and our degree of freedom, which is 9. So looking at how they intersect on this table, so we'll have this value, 2.262. So our T alpha over 2n minus 1 is 2.262. That's how it differs from the part 2, no, yung when the population standard deviation is known. So ang ginagamit lang doon is the Z, yun lang yung nasa pinakadulong part ng table, ng T table. So kasi kapag we are using the T table, we consider different degrees of freedom depending on the sample size. So marami tayo dung pagpipilian. That's why you have to consider the degrees of freedom, 10 minus 1, and the 95% confidence level. So we have our t value, which is 2.262, multiplied to our sample standard dev, which is 0.78 hours, divided by the square root of sample size 10. And we'll have 0.56 hours as our error when you round it off to the nearest hundreds. So we'll have this error of 0.56. So I hope you've learned how to identify the T alpha over 2n minus 1. No? Ito kasi yung bago sa video na to. This is what's new that you have to learn. And as well as to analyze the problem kung meron dito ay sample standard deviation. Because again, this is a part of confidence interval when the population standard deviation is unknown. Step 3, compute for the upper limit and the lower limit. So again, lower limit is equal to the point estimate, which is sample mean, minus the margin of error, which is, ang ating mean ay 7.1 hours, minus 0.56 hours, which is our margin of error. And we obtain 6.54 hours as our lower limit. For the upper limit, we'll have the mean, sample mean, plus the margin of error. That is 7.1 plus 0.56, which is probably equal to 7.66 hours. So if we're going to write our confidence interval, we'll have from 6.54 hours, we can write down the units, up to 7.66 hours. There you go. So that is our confidence interval for the 95% confidence level. Let's jump now to our second example. Stress test for a group of 10 men subjected to a stress situation. The mean number of heartbeats per minute was 126 and the standard deviation was 4. Find the 95% confidence interval of the true mean. So to write down the given, again, the subject of the study is a group of 10 men. So we only have sample size of 10. And from there, the mean number of heartbeat was 126. So that's our sample mean, since that is obtained from the 10 men, or which is our sample size. 126 heartbeats per minute. And the standard deviation, which is also a sample standard deviation, kasi galing siya dun sa 10 men. So we have 4 heartbeats per minute. And we're going to consider the confidence level, which is 95%. Yan. So very clear that from a group of 10 men, this is actually a sample ng ating study. And there we obtained the standard deviation. So again, the population standard deviation is unknown, and what we have is only the sample standard deviation. To compute for the margin of error, so our T alpha over 2n minus 1, so we have 95% confidence level, and we have df of 10 minus 1, again, 9. So 95, 9. So I guess we're on the same value, no? Kasi para sila ng sample size and para sila ng confidence interval. That's still 2.262. And multiply to sample standard deviation, which is 4 over square root of sample size 10. And we obtained a margin of error of 2.86. Ayan. So medyo malaki-laki yung ating margin of error. So to compute for the upper limit and the lower limit, follow the formula. Mean minus the error, which is, our mean is 126 minus the error 2.86. We'll have 123.14 heartbeats per minute. That's our minimum value for the mean. So the upper value, or the upper limit, which sets as our maximum heartbeats per minute, that is by adding the mean and the margin of error. And that is probably equal to 128.86 heartbeats per minute. And to determine the length of the confidence interval, so we'll have 123.14, that's our lower limit heartbeat per minute, up to 128.86. Pwede natin dito ilagay yung heartbeats per minute. Ayan. So I hope you get to learn how to identify the confidence interval when the population standard deviation is known. So you use this formula. Ayan. So to differentiate the second video from this third video, you have to really read the word problem. Kailangan mabasa nyo siyang mabuti. And you have to identify where the standard deviation will come from. Will it come from the population? So you use the second video. So, or the standard deviation will come from the sample of the study. So that means you'll use this third video. So that's how you should decide on it, no? Para hindi kayo malito. So titingnan saan galing ang standard deviation of the word problem. You may now take the assessment, take a pause, and have a screenshot. And that ends our exploration on confidence interval. So we'll now proceed to a more interesting topic in statistics on our next video. We will be exploring hypothesis testing. Goodbye, everyone.